Okay, welcome to Software Engineering Fundamentals video tutorial series on how to use Git. So first, I'd like to talk about actually what is Git. Well, Git is, think of it as a database in the cloud that stores many versions of your source code and allows you to share that code with your team. But more than that, it helps prevent conflicts. By conflicts, I mean when different members of the team edit code independently, especially when they edit the same file at the same time, Git can help prevent conflicts. All right, so in this video tutorial series, we're going to be covering a lot of commands in Git. So just briefly, I'll go over this in more detail at the end of the series, but just for right now, we're going to cover creating and cloning repositories, pulling source code from the repository to your local machine, committing your changes, and which is sort of like saving them, and pushing your changes to the repository so other team members can get them. And we're also, if we have time, going to have some videos on branching, which is a parallel version of your entire project, and then merging that branch back into the master branch. All right, so let's get on to the first video. The first video, this one, is about creating a repository. So in order to share source files within a team, you need a repository in the cloud where you have a master copy of that. It's no good if everyone has their own version because it just gets out of sync. And you also need your IDE, as in IntelliJ IDEA or Eclipse, configured to use a Git service in the cloud, which could be GitHub. There are others, but for these videos we're going to use GitHub and Eclipse. So when do we create a repository? Well, it's best to create that at the very start of the project. Don't wait until you've written a lot of source code before you do that. But in this video, I'm going to show you how to create a repository. Even though we've already started some code, I'm going to show you how to share that code in a brand new repository. All right, so the task we're going to cover in this video is creating a repository on GitHub, sharing our existing code from Eclipse to that repository, and pulling from the repository down to our local machine. The very first pull. All right, so I've drawn a picture to sort of show you what's going on here. So this represents the service in the cloud, the Git service in the cloud, which could be GitHub, could be Bitbucket or GitLab. We're going to use GitHub. Now this represents a web application, and you'll have on your local machine, you'll have a web browser having a look into GitHub here. All right, now on our local machine, we're also going to be running Eclipse with our source code views inside. That's actually a view of the source code on disk. So we've actually got copies of these four source files on disk, and we can see that in Eclipse. This area where we have a directory of source files and even our executable files, basically our project directory, Git calls that the working directory. All right, that's just a term we need to remember, the working directory. All right, so I'd like to show you the project in Eclipse and on disk, which is right over here. All right, so I've got this project. Let me change that. I'll remove this one. This is an old practice one I had. So we'll delete that. And we'll add our new project. So let's say we're just starting from scratch and we're going to add our new project. Because it's already an existing project, we need to import it. And an existing project into the workspace. And my projects I put in my user directory under a directory called Git, so all my projects are there. So the one we'll be working with is called Hello World Translator. Okay, so we'll open that one and just click Finish. and that brings it into our workspace. Okay, so you can see the 4 source files here. All right, so that's what it looks like in Eclipse. Just to show you, it's on disk. We're currently in the current directory of that same Hello World Translator program, and if we have a look to see what's in there, we've got a source directory. We've got these are the output where the class files go for IntelliJ IDEA and Eclipse. We've also got a .project, which is the Eclipse project file, a .idea, because I can also use this project in IntelliJ IDEA, and a class path file. Okay, now normally you don't check these into Git, these projects and that, because every team member is going to have a different version of that with their own preferences. And if you did check that in these files into Git, then you basically, the last person who committed overwrites the preferences, the Eclipse preferences or IDEA preferences of everyone else, and that is really annoying. So we keep those out of Git. So what we usually have is a .ignore file to ignore those kinds of files. All right, so if we have a look inside the source directory, we'll see those 4 source files there. So basically that's what we've got. All right, so the same ones that are in Eclipse. Now the first thing we want to do is create a repository on GitHub through the web browser. So going back to our diagram, what we want to do is through our web browser, initialize, create a new repository on GitHub. That's what we're going to be doing now. So first of all, we need to log into Git. We need to sign in. And I'll use my credentials that I've already got. Okay. Now, let's have a look. So once you've logged in, you have a look at your repositories. The practice one is already there. So what we want to do is we want to create, or what you want to do is you want to create a new repository called just Hello World Translator. Okay, so you get the green tick when it doesn't exist, and we'll say this is project for SEF video tutorials on using Git, something like that. Right, so give it a short description. I'll leave this public so you guys can have a look at it and play with it. Not a big deal. Don't wreck it. There'll be a record of who does what, or you can download it to your system and play around with it. All right, so we'll just create that repository. We can tick this, initialize the repository with a README. That'll create a default README. And we'll be able to edit that in the next step. So let's create that. Okay, so it's created a README file in Markdown. MD stands for Markdown. It's given the title of the project and the description in there. So we could edit that further if we wanted to, but I won't do that now. So it's already done one commit. You'll notice it says one commit there, which is for this README file. All right, so basically we've done step 1. So we've created that repository. It's done one commit. These little pages with the curly bit represents a commit or a version, and there's only one README file in there. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is we want to share our Eclipse project. So we want to create a local repository. We have to create a local repository on our local machine before we can connect these two up. All right, so let's do that. So the way we do that in Eclipse is by what's called sharing the project. And if we click on our project in the navigator, so right click or on a Mac control click, and then we go down to the team menu, team and share project. Okay, now what we want to do is we want to create our repository inside our project directory. So I'll just go back to which is this checkbox here. So I'll just show you what I mean by that. So you can create a repository outside of your working directory, but it's much more convenient to have it inside. It's actually a folder called .git. And so every time you copy the entire project directory, the Git repository gets copied with it, which is really convenient. So that's what we're going to do by clicking this checkbox that says use or create repository in parent folder of project. All right. Okay, so we'll just select that, and you can't check that, but so now we can create the repository, which will create the .git folder under this directory here. You can see it's got the Hello World Translator folder and then /.git at the end there. That's what it's going to be creating. So we'll click that and finish. And we'll just have a look on disk to see what it's done. So if I have a look at our Hello World Translator directory, you'll see that it's created this, this .git file for us here. So let's just have a look inside there. You don't really need to know what's in there, but it's got all this metadata information. The objects will store the actual versions of your source files, logs, and there's recording what the heads of the branches are and all this sort of meta information. But you don't need to, you should never edit anything in there. All right. So back to our diagram. We've now created this blue .git repository here in our working directory. Now the next thing we want to do, and the last step, it's a big last step, is we want to connect these two repositories. So we've got a brand new repository up here, which will have a master branch with a single commit version in it and a single README file in it. And we want to pull that down. So first of all, we're going to have to connect these two. So there's a concept of a remote and a local. So we're going to have to set up Eclipse to tell Eclipse that for this project, the remote repository is going to be the one we created. All right, so that's how we connect it, and then we'll do the pull. So I'll explain more as we go. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is click the project in the navigator again and go down to the team menu again. And this time we're going to do a pull. Now that's just convenient. It'll prompt us to configure the remote repository and all that. Now it defaults to the name origin, which is a standard, so keep that. Now what we want to put in here is the URL of the repository we just created on GitHub. So we'll go back over to our GitHub, and so this is we're currently looking at our Hello World Translator repository. It's just got the README there. Now if you click on this clone or download button, right, I won't actually clone or download it, but it's got the URL there, HTTPS. Now this little button will copy it, right? So you'd either copy it that way or you click this button and now it's copied to the pasteboard, this URL. So that's exactly what we need to put in for the URI for Eclipse for the remote. So we're now configuring the remote repository for this project. So I'll just paste here. Okay, now it's parsed this URL and it's figured out that the host is github.com and the path is daring developer. So I'll show you the whole path is daring developer hello world translator.git. That is our remote repository that we just created. So it's got the host, the path to the .git file, and because in your case, you may not have put in your credentials, your GitHub credentials here for you may not have told Eclipse yet what your GitHub credentials are. So if these two are blank, you need to fill those in with your GitHub credentials. I've already done that. My username is Daring Developer, and I've already entered my password. So that's already pre-populated that. All right, and it's a good idea to store your credentials in a secure store, so you can click that. All right, so let's do next. Okay, so okay, so the next thing we want to do is click New Remote. Okay, so this is now for the destination Git repository. Let me just see. And it auto-fills. I think that's just the same thing we did. All right, no, so this is, yep. Okay, so we're going to click this configure upstream for push and pull, because in our case, it's our own repository. So when you're using an open source project that you haven't got access to, you're generally only pulling. But in our case, this is our repository and we have write access. So we want to be able to push to it as well as pull. So we're going to click that to do both. Now, this reference here is which branch we want to reference. Now, there is a master branch in the remote. So if I type M, right, it's going to, or master, or the whole thing, it's going to come up with a list of branches. There's only one, so we'll select that one. We'll click that, we'll double click that, and it's replaced the reference to that branch. So that's a relative path name into the .git metadata that I was showing you earlier. Reference the head of the master branch. Okay, so now we've set the reference. We've got the same remote we had before, and we're going to configure it for both pushing up and pulling down. So now we can finish. Okay. Okay, so now what it's showing us now, because I started a pull, we've now successfully configured, let's go back to the diagram. We've now successfully configured our local repository down here to connect to the remote repository up there for both pushing and pulling. But as you recall, I actually started this whole process with a pull. So now we've finished the configuration. Now it's actually doing the pull. Okay, and it's actually done a pull already. This is the fetch result. So fetch is a part of a pull. Pull is actually a command that does a fetch as well as a merge. So here we've got it's fetch data from the repository, and it's the initial commit that was done by GitHub. So if we look at this GitHub, this commit ID, blah 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 408. That will actually be the README file. So let's go and have a look at GitHub. See if we can't see that commit number. If I click on commits, I can probably see that commit ID. Yep, maybe not. ED05F40. ED05F40. It's probably just truncated the 8 over here, I guess. All right, so that's our commit. That's what GitHub did when we created the repository and we ticked that option to create the README file. It's created this initial commit with the commit message is initial commit. So that's what we've pulled down. So in theory, we should now have that README file in our local directory. So we've done this pull, it's fetched. So we should have this commit in our local repository with the README, and it should have put this README file into our working directory there. So let's go see if it's there. All right, so we'll just have a look at our Hello World Translator directory again. And what do you know? There it is. Oops. readme.md. Today at 16:27. So that was 3 minutes ago. All right. So we've successfully done a pull from the remote repository and pulled that README file down into our own repository, and it's also updated the working directory with that README file. Okay, so we'll just close that dialog. Okay, so what else can we do? Let's show you that the README file is in Eclipse as well. Okay, so you can see the README file here. If I double click it, Eclipse has already picked it up, and there it is. And Eclipse understands Markdown language, and it's formatted it correctly. All right, so that's it for the first video in the series. And so in summary, what we've done is we've understood some concepts about a Git service being in the cloud, in this case GitHub. We've created a remote repository with an initial README file. We have created a local repository, and we've connected those two repositories together and then pulled the latest updates, which has brought down that first initial commit with the README file in it, and it's updated our working directory, and Eclipse has access to it. So there you go. So in the next video series, that was the first one. In the next video series, we're going to have a look at initially committing your source file. So we haven't checked in those 4 source files to GitHub yet, the Hello World Translator Java source file. So that's what we're going to look at doing in the next video. Okay, thank you.